the whole January the 6th thing, that's a big thing. But the documents are kind of an issue that people really haven't looked at much. And that may be what this is about. As CNN puts it, they say the National Archives, charged with collecting and sorting presidential material, has previously said that 15 boxes of White House records were recovered from Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, including some that were classified. So they've already gotten 15 boxes. Do they think there's more boxes that are there? Is that why they're going back? Or is it a fishing expedition? In early June, a handful of investigators made a rare visit to the property seeking more information about potentially classified material from Trump's time in the White House that had been taken to Florida. The 4 investigators included Jay Bratt, the chief of counterintelligence and export control section at the Justice Department, and they sat down with 2 of Trump's attorneys, Bob and Evan Corcoran, according to sources present at the meeting. At the beginning of the meeting, Trump stopped by and greeted the investigators near a dining room. After he left, without answering any questions, the investigators asked the attorneys if they could see where Trump was storing the documents. The attorneys took the investigators to the basement where the boxes of materials were being stored, and the investigators looked around the room before eventually leaving, according to the source. So, 5 days later, on June 8th, Trump's attorneys received a letter from the investigators asking them to further secure the room where the documents were stored. Aides subsequently added a padlock to the room. In April and May, aides to Trump at Mar-a-Lago were interviewed by the FBI as part of the probe into the handling of presidential records, according to sources familiar with it. And they say a CNN senior legal analyst said it's a federal crime to remove classified documents wrongly. And so if you are filling out an affidavit and you have to list the crime, you can list that as the crime. So the question is, did they take the boxes? Evidently not. Evidently they left the boxes there. They were stored under a padlock. So is that what this was about? Well, before we move on, let's talk about Sandy Berger. Again, the closest parallel to this. And I talked about this extensively when he died back in December 2015. And it went back to right after the Clintons left the White House, not long after. It was in 2003. So it's a couple years later. And the question, I guess, was, what was he trying to cover up? Because Sandy Berger was the former national security advisor in the Clinton administration. And so he goes there to the National Archives, where all these documents are kept about presidential administrations primarily, I guess. There's a lot of things that are there in the National Archives, but a lot of stuff about presidential records. Perhaps after a couple of years, and it had been a couple of years, right? The election's in 2000, and George W. Bush takes office in 2001. And then in 2003, Sandy Berger, the former national security advisor, goes to the National Archives and goes through all the records. He's given carte blanche to do whatever he wants because, this guy's important. And so he goes through all these records, and they see him leaving with all these records stuffed in his pants and other places, and they're intimidated. They don't really want to stop him. He goes outside and he starts destroying all these things. And, they reported it, but they gave him carte blanche. And when I talked about this back in December 2015, it's become one of the key things that they talked about to people who work at the National Archives. They say, you can't let anybody come in, no matter who they are, and just take stuff. And people were intimidated by this and didn't do what they needed to do. And they used Sandy Berger as a prime example of all of this. But let's take a look at some of the other people, some of the other notable thefts, and we'll talk about what happened to them. By the way, while we're talking about Sandy Berger, his consequences for this, nobody knows what documents he stole and destroyed, evidently, or they didn't investigate. So he took them out in his clothes. He went to a nearby construction trailer and stashed them there, and then deleted them. 2 years later, he was sentenced to 100 hours of community service. Well, that's tough. He was also fined $50,000. Yeah, but for Sandy Berger, that's, not that much. It's like $1.5 million for Alex Jones or something. He also lost his security clearance and his license to practice law. But that's all that happened to him. Now, most of the other people who have been involved in National Archive thefts have done it for money, and they got hit with bigger penalties. They either did it for money or they did it because somebody was concerned they might be turning this over to someone else. The earliest one, the motivation is a little bit foggy. 1963, Robert Bradford Murphy and Elizabeth Murphy. He and his wife, he was 45, she was 31. They were indicted on 2 counts of transporting from Cincinnati to Detroit stolen documents taken from a number of repositories, including the National Archives. So they examined and stole documents from the files of the Justice Department, the War and Navy Department, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and many other federal records. There's no indication, at least in this article, as to what their motivations were. Most of the other people, as I said, they were motivated because they wanted to get historical documents that they could resell. For example, the next one, 1987. So you go from 1963 to 1987. 59-year-old Charles Mount, an art historian and portrait painter, arrested in 1987 for stealing documents from the National Archives and Records Administration, the Library of Congress. He offered to sell to a Boston bookstore owner a collection of Civil War documents, including 3 letters written by Abraham Lincoln. And the bookstore owner got suspicious and contacted the FBI. In 2002, you had a guy who had been a curator with the National Archives, stole hundreds of photographs and documents, including signed presidential pardons. He got 21 months in federal prison, and he paid more than $73,000 in restitution. This other guy who stole the Civil War documents, Charles Mount, in 87, was charged with stealing 400 documents, given 5 years. By the way, the Sandy Berger thing in 2003, that was when they charged him. He didn't even get arrested. Yeah, I mean, if this had been somebody with the Trump administration, they would have called CNN and all the news organizations. They would have done a perp walk out of his house, but they didn't do that with Sandy Berger. I don't know exactly when he stole these things, but it was well before 2003. It might have been right after the Clinton administration. They realized, we left some of that stuff behind. They're going to find that. 2003, here's another case. Howard Harner, 68 years old. He got 2 years in prison, fined $10,000. Again, he stole a bunch of Civil War memorabilia from the National Archives and was selling it on eBay. Things like documents that were signed by Robert E. Lee, Jeff Davis, Ulysses Grant, and Custer. Concealed them in his clothing, just like Sandy Berger. Denny McTague, 2006, 40 years old, an unpaid intern at the National Archive. Again, he got 164 Civil War era documents. Do you start to see a pattern here? 67-year-old in 2011, Les Waffen. He'd worked 40 years at the National Archives and Records Administration in the motion picture sound and video branch. In 2012, he pled guilty to the theft of 955 items from the archives, original recordings of the 1948 World Series, a rare recording of the 1937 Hindenburg disaster, and he tried to sell some of these things on eBay. So, if you see some documents from the Trump administration show up on eBay for sale and they have a contact there at Mar-A-Lago, that'd be a dead giveaway. But so far, that hasn't happened yet. Thomas Lowry, 2011. The guy was 78 years old. Now, this one is really, really strange. In this particular one, he didn't steal anything. What he did was he altered a document. It was a presidential pardon from Abraham Lincoln for a Civil War soldier in the Union Army who was court-martialed for desertion. Now, he was pardoned on April the 14th, 1864. And the guy changed it to April 14th, 1865. That was the day that John Wilkes Booth assassinated Lincoln. And so he then claimed as a historian, look at this. This has got special historical relevance because this was obviously the last thing that Abraham Lincoln did. It's on the day he was killed. I don't know why he was doing that unless, again, I don't understand. I understand what he did. I don't understand his motivation for it unless he wants to say, look what I found. Everybody's missed this for the last 150 years, but look what I found. It was the same day. Maybe that was his motivation. I don't know. He was actually not charged or penalized because the statute of limitations had expired. So he got away with doing that, and I guess they got out the whiteout and fixed it or something. 2011, we're almost done. We had two more here. 2011, 10,000 historical documents removed from the National Archives. Among the stolen items were 7 reading copies of speeches that FDR had delivered that contained his edits and his handwritten additions. This was a 63-year-old guy, and he was working with a 24-year-old. So they got a year and a day in federal prison, and the other guy got 7 years in federal prison. Again, a lot of these things, some of these things don't make any sense. Most of them have to do with Civil War documents or things that people were trying to sell on eBay and or both of those. Finally, 2018, a private researcher and historian stole at least 291 U.S. service members' dog tags and at least 134 other records from World War II era of downed airmen files and unit records. Some of the dog tags bore evidence of damage, such as dents and charring due to fire sustained during the crashes. He also stole ID cards, personal letters, photographs, a Bible, pieces of downed U.S. aircraft from the downed airman files, and the Normandy campaign field messages from World War II unit recordings. So, again, he's stealing those. Is it for his own personal use or to resell it? Probably to resell it on the black market. He got a year in prison and 3 years probation, 8 months of which are to be served in home confinement. And he had to pay $43,000 restitution to those who purchased the stolen goods. So it was for sale. He had made $43,000 selling these things. So when we look at it, there's a lot of cases there, except for the one where he altered the date. Most of these things were for they were for economical reasons, right? They were stealing it and then trying to sell it on eBay or selling it privately to people on the black market. You have the one that is the historical one, but the one that is really the parallel is Sandy Berger. He had his law license removed and got a slap on the wrist for considering it's Sandy Berger, $50,000 fine. And so that is what some of the Democrats are saying. They say, will this be used to essentially convict him of a crime? Like the only penalty for Sandy Berger really was, well, we're taking your law license. Well, they take away Trump's ability to run for office again. Is that what this is ultimately about? The common man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.